Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for joining me as part of our Connecting Minds series. I'm so lucky to have Amy as part of our Gabadoo team, but Amy has a wealth of experience as a speech and language therapist, and we are going to be chatting about AAC today. So I'm going to let Amy introduce herself, and then we'll kind of get into some of the questions. So welcome,
That's
Amy.
great. Thanks so much, Jess. I'm so delighted. I'm really honoured to be asked to talk today about AAC to both from an SLT perspective and hopefully to help some OTs that are on the Gabadoo platform as well. So brief introduction, I'm Amy Collins. I'm a speech and language therapist. I specialise in paediatric disability supports. I've been doing this for the past 12 years. I've always kind of been in this area. I have a degree in early childhood studies and then a master's in speech and language. So I feel like I've got a good range of studies and also an experience. I've worked in Ireland and New Zealand. So in case there's any Kiwis out there who are linking in or anyone who's worked in New Zealand, there's a big Irish contingency out there. So hi to everybody. I have a specific interest, I suppose, then even in the last few years, particularly 5 or 6, in working with autistic children, teens and young people. And then more recently working specifically in the area of diagnostics and support for autistic girls, and then the non-binary and trans clients that I have as well. So lots of really interesting experience, and I hope I'll be able to kind of give more of a framework around maybe some of the new neuroaffirmative approach to supporting clients. I know we're all trying to learn and everyone's on a learning journey about, so I'm hoping that I can provide some information today as well. I suppose I have a real interest in AAC, and that ties into kind of respecting all forms of communication and kind of respecting everyone's authenticity. So yeah, I'm hopeful I can share some information today, and if there's any questions specifically that follow this, I hope I can be able to follow up with that as well.
Oh, I'm sure you will, with that wealth of experience. And I think that, like we were chatting a little bit before, because Gabadoo is an interdisciplinary platform, you've got OTs and speech therapists. We are very much trying to make this Connecting Minds series, information that goes across both professions, which is equally important. And as we know that you can't be working on motor skills or be working on tasks with a child if you're not familiar with how they're communicating, you're not respecting that. I mean, family-centered practice goes across, all those areas. So I think it's brilliant to open, like typically an OT wouldn't go and do training on AAC. So it's nice to be able to share some practical tips, even to have that little bit of education and information, which can be a great in our toolbox for therapists.
Absolutely. And look, as an SLT, I suppose, working in disability services, I would have worked with lots of OTs. Secretly, OTs happen to be my favorite colleagues to work with. Don't tell anyone else. But so I've done a lot of kind of cross work, and I'm learning as well. I'm taking a lot of experience I'm bringing today from my OT colleagues who I've worked with. So I work publicly. So I work in the public sector as a paediatric disability therapist, but I also started recently my own speech therapy business, running SLT clinics in West Limerick, and then doing more online consults so I'm a Limerick woman, but I live in Kildare. So I'm between both. And I'm hoping to really kind of branch into more educator and parent training around this as well. So yeah, lots going on, and really excited to be able to share.
Yeah, loads going on, but like exactly, it all kind of comes back to that, parent education empowerment piece. So do you know what, maybe even if we start with like, what is AAC? Because I think that's really important that people have a really good understanding of what that is and what are the forms of AAC.
So AAC is another acronym. I know we're all used to lots and lots of them. This one means augmentative and alternative communication. I'll break that down, but really there's loads of definitions. People kind of think about it in different ways. The way I simply think about it is using lots of ways to communicate, not just spoken language. And so then that ties in OTs, because often we're looking at access and supporting motor skills when you're moving beyond spoken language. So the alternative part of the acronym is often really easy to understand, and it's probably the more traditionally understood part when it comes to parents and educators and maybe colleagues. So this is for someone whose speech might be very difficult for lots of different reasons, and they may use another way of communicating as their main format. It doesn't mean that they don't also use speech, but it may be for lots of different reasons. And I'll go into that again, types of people who might be using AAC. But it tends to be their main kind of way of speaking is using an alternative form. And again, I'll touch on that once I've talked a little bit about the augmentative. So the augmentative piece, I suppose, when I started to practice as an SLT, I didn't really actually fully think about the A and the A. I'd always thought about alternative systems. And more recently, I find myself delving kind of into more with my clients and their families and schools around augmentative supports for communication. So this might be, for example, a client who can quite effectively get their message across using spoken language, but for lots of different reasons might feel more comfortable in differing means of communication that they choose to use. So for example, somebody who might use spoken language sometimes, maybe at home or in a specific environment with certain people, or certain people who might understand them in a particular way, or they might mix that up. So some children may feel more comfortable speaking in certain situations with certain people, and then in other situations may choose to use another form to supplement their speech. And this can also differ as time goes on. So a lot of our kids, as they transition into teenagedom and young adults, lots of different social challenges come up. So we also often see a kind of a shift into different modes. So I kind of find myself, I suppose, doing a lot of education around that one, the augmentative, and how it's really important for parents and educators, and I suppose therapists working with kids, to really kind of respect the child or the young person's way that they speak. So one of the kind of analogies that I think I find helpful to explain that is, you know, there's people in your life that you kind of want to avoid having a big long phone call with if you've had a really long day. Like maybe you need to make contact with a person in your family, but you're like, oh, I don't have the energy to do that today. I think I'll just send a quick text and I might catch up with them tomorrow. So in that's me using, okay, I could speak to this person using my spoken words, but actually I'm choosing to send them a WhatsApp message. And then vice versa. So my best friend lives in Cork, I live in Kildare. If I want to send her information, a text is never going to be enough. I need a debrief, I need her information. So that's a 20-minute voice note. She's very lucky to receive them. So that's me kind of choosing alternative ways of communication in really practical, I suppose, everyday life. So this is how we're trying to build communication toolkits for kids.
And like I think that description is so important, is that there must be so many misconceptions out there that AAC is only really for children that are pre-verbal, you know, non-verbal, and this can be, you know, an option to choose, you know, so families might be then sourcing it, but to remember that actually this could be used beside other means of communicating. Absolutely. And that it can depend on several different reasons, like you said, and regulation being a massive one. You know,
absolutely.
We're not feeling regulated in an environment, if we're not with a safe adult or with people we're familiar with. So yeah, I suppose I can understand why you must be doing so much education around it.
Yeah, and I mean, things are definitely improving, and I think things like social media, sending DMs to each other. So for example, I suppose traditionally we broke down AAC into high tech or high technology systems and low technology systems, and the high tech systems just keep on coming. You know, there's more and more. So we would have a lot of iPads or maybe dedicated communication devices. People might be familiar with i110s, for example, by Tobii Dynavox, and they are specific dedicated communication devices that hold communication apps. For example, people might know TD Snap, ProLocal to Go, Lamp for Life. There's loads. I could be listing them all day. Then you might have people who might need alternative access methods as well on top of that. So you're talking about eye gaze, maybe chin switches, head switches, or even just mounting. So kind of appropriate levels of being able to access the system. Then you've got phones. I mean, phones are, everyone has a phone. I don't know anyone who doesn't have one. And there's loads of really inbuilt natural ways to communicate, like WhatsApp. You can use text, emojis, you can send a voice note, you can send a video, email, social media, Instagram, DMs. I mean, there's just loads and loads and loads. And they're all kind of AAC systems. And I suppose as we're progressing with the more neuroaffirmative approach and listening to the autistic community more and more, it's moving away from the really medical model of it needs to be a really high-tech, specified, prescribed device that only speech therapists can look at and model and change and alter. And I mean, if it breaks, it has to go back to another country. You know, we're actually moving really into the practical, well, what's available for other kids? What do other kids use? Why can't they use something like that? Or can we make it work? And then you've got low-tech systems. People are probably familiar with things like symbol-based systems. For example, PECS would be one of those. Sign systems, so our Irish Sign Language, or LOVE, which is specific to Ireland, buttons, switches, pens and paper, natural gesture. There's loads and loads and loads. High tech technically means, it generally means something you have to plug in. That's the easiest way to think about it. And then low tech is something you either have, like your hands for love, or you might have a pen and paper nearby, or a symbol or a drawing. So something that's easier. You don't have to technically plug it in. Yeah. So there's lots out there.
There's so much out there. And
Yeah.
like when you're chatting, even there, you know, like it does really, like when you were talking about, you know, looking at that kind of idea that it has to be this high-tech device, like the amount of support with some of the teens and young adults that I work with that are autistic, and we talk about, you know, keeping those social connections for them with friends through WhatsApp. And so we're already using so many ways of like communicating with family or with friends. And like you said, it's things we do every day. There's loads of people that I would send a voice note to, and there's loads of people that I wouldn't get caught on the phone to, and we'll be so like
we all have them.
Absolutely.
So it's a real kind of total communication approach, and this is what we've been kind of talking about for years as therapists, is really respecting and the acceptance of a learner's communication systems, respecting their choices, and then supporting them as therapists to use those choices effectively. And our role, regardless of our discipline, is really always about supporting the child to function as best they can in all their environments. And this is definitely one of those areas that kind of crosses across all of us, and also can look very different for each child and throughout a child's life. I think that's really important as well. Sometimes as therapists, we have to put in funding, just like OTs for maybe a wheelchair, a piece of equipment. And there's a kind of understanding that wheelchairs will change, or seating systems will need to change as the child enters teenage life. And sometimes there isn't the same kind of understanding that something that worked when they were in primary school may not be socially acceptable now, or mightn't be their choice anymore. And how do we kind of continue to foster that relationship with the family, with the child, and with the school, to really kind of honor that and try and promote that in all of our work, in all of our sessions, in our discussions with families, kind of pulling apart what the child's preferences are and really trying to focus on that then.
Yeah, that's so important. And listening as well, is that, you know, what may have worked in the past no longer does work. And remembering that it is a process, you're facilitating the process. You can't be a fixed idea in your head of like, this is going to work for this child or this family. That, you know, it is a process, and you're guiding them with information that you have. And like you said, maybe you do have to apply for pieces of equipment. So and it's just remember that goes across all areas that we support families.
Absolutely.
And the exact same for AAC. So we kind of touched on it there, I suppose, around who might use AAC. Maybe if you could give an idea of who would benefit from it, or maybe.
Absolutely. So I'll use the terminology children, but this crosses across teenagers, young adults, and adults if you're working with it as well. But I suppose traditionally AAC systems, which would have been high tech and kind of more medical model, would have been used with children with intellectual disabilities. So we would have seen a lot of big, huge, clunky devices years ago, particularly in special schools. That's kind of where we saw a lot of them. Now they're in the mainstream. We've got iPads, we've got iPad minis, we've got iPhones, we've got small little devices that are usable in the mainstream school. So it's completely shifted in a really short period of time, actually. So we've also moved into a lot of autistic children and teenagers would experience kind of communication preferences that might be varied. So you might like to use a messaging service, or I know some of the teachers have set up emails with the kids, you know, even things like that, to say, I don't feel comfortable talking in this situation, but my opinion is still really valid and I'd like it to be counted. And that's where the education around teacher training is really important, to kind of respect and also try to encourage the person to feel comfortable. Of course, that's where OT comes in as well, that regulation piece, but also understanding that just like us, everyone has off days. So to have a really well robust toolkit that you can pull from different things at different times is really what we're trying to achieve. So a lot of our autistic children and teenagers would use lots of different ways of communicating. And then I suppose I touched a little bit on maybe people who speech might be quite difficult for, and that might be children with severe motor speech issues. Again, linking with OT, you might be looking at motor dyspraxia or apraxia of speech. And then you're talking about children who have got significant mental health difficulties. So for different emotional and social and trauma, kids who've been through trauma may feel that speech is quite difficult. I know I've talked to several of the families I work with who have children with quite complex medical conditions. And I really thought it was interesting. One mum said to me, we haven't used love in about 5 years, but when she was sick in Crumlin and she just didn't have the energy to speak, she started using the signs in the bed. And I just thought, gosh, and she said, we haven't been doing them, you know, because we were like, she's talking full whack, she hasn't stopped for years. but suddenly she was so tired and she had medications that were making her really, really tired. And she started signing in the bed again. So I just thought that was a really powerful way of thinking. That's a toolkit that was so robust for that child that 5 years later, she could use something to communicate so effectively. So you've got kids who also may have selective mutism, so who may feel more comfortable speaking in situations and other different situations. The list really goes on and on. It's actually becoming unusual for me not to be talking about AAC with a client anymore, because again, we're moving away from that specific, robust, prescriptive. Now that's still required for some kids. It is, absolutely. But the vast majority of my caseload will be in mainstream schools. And so you're talking about much more functional, everyday type of systems, and how can we use those to your benefit?
I think so important for both speech and
Absolutely.
to be so aware, because like when
Yeah.
you're thinking of, a sensory toolkit or a box to support regulation, we're always talking about how you can then communicate, that you need a break or you need this. And thinking about the fact that for a lot of children would feel very uncomfortable having to verbally communicate that. So it is really thinking and respecting their choice around what kind of communication method they want to use, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know something that comes up a lot, Amy, definitely for me as an OT, is that I suppose I go to people's homes to do intervention, and we'd be chatting, we'd be talking about nearly every area of development. Communication comes up a lot. And so sometimes maybe the family has been given guidance that their child may not be ready for AAC. And I always have this kind of question mark around that. So maybe we could explore, like, is there a certain checklist for readiness, or is this more that actually no, perspectives need to change a little bit around this area?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on it there. I think years ago, traditionally, there was kind of an expectation that to prepare a child for the use of an AA system, they were often symbol based. And so it was thought that a child had to really solidify the skill of picture matching. We now know that's not actually the case. You're right. Like the neuroaffirmative approach and even just research has shown that there's actually no prerequisites for using AAC if we as therapists use a robust system. So something that's not maybe, you'll probably start seeing a move away from things like PECs, even though I won't go into it now because it's a whole thing. But I suppose moving into more naturalistic language and robust systems, PECs tends to be a very request heavy system. It definitely has its place for some. I'm not going to jump on it now, but from a robust perspective, I suppose you're looking at a system that can help a child function in every kind of scenario, be it a request, a social engagement piece, a laugh, a sarcastic joke with a buddy, an emotion, an expression of sadness or happiness, or like you said, regulation requests. So actually, we've now kind of learned that we should be encouraging the use of robust AAC systems that provide the child and family with opportunities for communication that can kind of grow as they develop. What we want to be moving away from is introducing a system when they're 5, knowing that it's not really going to be there in 5 or 10 years time, because you're really trying to set up. Now you'll obviously be doing trial and error for some kids, absolutely, but you're really trying to keep robust AAC at the forefront. And that's also where working really closely with your OT colleagues, I know as an SLT and our other disciplines, is so important, because if everybody's familiar with the systems and modeling and saying the same things to the family, for example, if someone was saying, oh, I don't think they're ready for AAC, but I'm saying they are, how confusing that message is for families. So it's just about, as you said, getting on the right page. So we know better now and we can strive to do better. And the evidence is really, really pointing strongly to presume competence. And then our job as therapists is to work out what that might look like for the family in conjunction with their wants and needs.
Because what you find is actually, parents do feel empowered at times to, articulate that they don't feel their child is, maybe matched to this communication method, and they'd like to explore other things. And I suppose when they're told no, that there's, you have to be ready for it, and that I suppose it knocks their confidence.
Absolutely.
Well, that was my instinct and I want to explore this, So it's respecting that as well, if it is a goal that,
Absolutely. And the parents are the experts, we know this, the parents are the experts. And the other thing is, I suppose, for all the will in the world, you can do kind of your assessment and think, gosh, this child would really benefit from an AAC system. it is a commitment. You know,
Yeah.
it is work for a family. It's a whole new way of communicating, particularly one of the higher tech kind of specific dedicated communication apps. So I think being really upfront and honest with parents. And I've had really big conversations with families who said, actually, do you know what? There's so much going on in our house right now that I actually don't think we can take it on. But there are alternatives. So it's not, oh, you're not doing that, that's fine. Then we're not going to give your child a voice. Of course there is. And I can talk about that actually a little bit later. I know we talked about from a Gabadoo platform perspective, what could we maybe be promoting if you're waiting for a device or on a wait list for a device. And the same goes if a family don't feel like they're ready to take this on. That's really important to listen to as well. It's a lot of work. You know, you'll be supported, but really it comes down to when the door is closed, front door is closed in the evening, there's work to do with the family. So I think being really upfront and honest with families as well, without the kind of pressure, well, if you don't do this, you get nothing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I actually think that readiness, that family readiness is really important with
Absolutely.
setting, not only with AAC, but with toileting, with feeding.
100%.
There's a huge commitment with certain, I suppose, areas in particular, because it's a new
Absolutely.
way of kind of doing it. And
Yeah.
for families, they really do need to be ready. And it's important as
Mhm.
therapists to respect that as well, to go,
Absolutely.
but in the meantime, these are other things that you could be doing. So rather
Yeah.
than also getting tunnel vision as a therapist, is to try
Yeah.
and say, let's
Yeah.
park that and pause it for a minute, and
Yeah.
let's support this parent on where they're at. So we touched on it there. I mean, obviously AAC is an area of focus on Gabadoo that
Mhm.
families can get support around. Obviously, we're not writing reports and submitting for applications, so that
Mhm.
obviously can be a barrier if a family doesn't
Mm.
have a device. So we
Absolutely.
chatted about that. But even if a family comes on and they say we're actually waiting for a device, but it's taking a while and we'd love to be doing something in the meantime, because a lot of families coming on are like, we haven't really seen a speech therapist, and maybe if we
Yeah.
have, it's been very brief, and
Yeah.
they just want to sponge in all that information. So I
Yeah.
suppose, what would that look like, in terms of what kind of support could therapists give them?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the funding system in the HSE is so sporadic and random and appears to just vary from CHO to CHO. So without question, I've had families waiting a year plus as standard. Do you know? So you've already identified a clinical need for that family. What can you do as an SLT or as an OT if you're in a similar situation? A family, or even a family at the early stages of, I don't know if we want to go down the route of AAC. Do you know, what could we introduce that would be practical, helpful, but not a huge commitment like a whole communication device? So I suppose things like familiarizing yourself as a therapist, regardless of your discipline, about the child. And I mean, that goes without saying, trying to understand the child's current system. So asking those specific questions to parents around, how does your child communicate? Besides using spoken language, do they use text? Like the things I've mentioned, do they? So probing that to
Yeah.
get those specific answers, because often families don't think of that as an alternative or augmentative communication system. So that's our job now, to kind of say, they're also really valid ways of communicating. And you might get a couple of nuggets from that you can go, hang on, that sounds like a really effective system for your child. Could we explore expanding that a little bit more? So this can happen even if a child hasn't got an SLT in place, and OT is their first, port of call. Just having that really kind of, I suppose, specific probed question about communication systems, and using the information I've provided today. What about Instagram? What about, DMs? What about emails? What about WhatsApp? Oh yeah, actually they send voice notes. Okay, great. So we know they feel confident recording their voice. So you'd be surprised by just even asking those probing questions what can come out. If you can explore with the child themselves what they like to communicate. So I don't know if a questionnaire could go to the child, or maybe just through the family you might get that information. And often it'll be something that's working already, and then you kind of formalizing that a little bit more for them.
So when families are filling it out, Amy, we often
Yeah,
send them a blog post as well. So we'll be updating it with some of the questions
fantastic.
you mentioned there, but we do probe a little bit around what are they currently using, and
Yes,
asking questions. So it could be in that probing stage, they get the blog
absolutely.
post, they can read through, okay, what do I really need to include here? Because I think that's
Yeah,
a tricky step for parents to know, like,
definitely.
what are they looking for here?
Yeah,
So if a speech and language therapist has ticked AAC as an area that they're happy to support families, then they can really review that and go, I
yeah,
suppose the first step, like you said, is validating. You're actually doing
yeah.
tons already, and
Loads.
I can see some strengths here, and kind of working from there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And even just promoting what I was talking about at the start, the augmentative part, because I think we have that traditional PECs or communication device, and they're extremely valid. But let's look at the augmentative piece. What are they using to supplement their spoken language in different environments? You're telling me, and I'm seeing here, your child has a lot of anxiety at school. Is that a place where we can explore an augmentative system for them? So even just that knowledge piece has been, I've seen it with families going, oh, okay, it's not one or the other. It's respecting all forms of communication in that child's toolkit. The other thing I would recommend, and it's something that I talk a lot about and we do some in-service on, is if you can at all, to kind of try to upskill yourself in love. And the reason for that is it's becoming so well used at school. It's becoming, a lot of teachers are getting training in services. And I think even as an OT, having those kind of really an understanding of not just the signs. And I think that's it. It's not just, oh, I can make the sign with my hand. It's how do I encourage a family to kind of use it, say in your activities of daily living. So if you're trying to encourage a skill like toothbrushing or showering, and the child needs to follow commands, can we put in a love sign to help them understand it's time to go? Or, let's have a drink. Can we actually model that for them, and will it help their understanding? So I would recommend, if you can at all, if you have any opportunity to try and upskill in love. I know they're running lots of module ones online at the moment, so it might be a good time to start linking in and have a look at that. If you work with an SLT or no one as well, they might be able to give you a hand. The other thing is in sessions, in actually indirect sessions, or even for a family, providing a core board. So that's a really simple, printable, laminated design. There's loads online. I can give you some links at the end just to add to that blog post. Really simple to use, really simple to show a family. You can print, you can send it as a PDF, and try to give the family some guidance around using it. And again, it all comes back to modeling. So I always think it's really important that we're even just promoting modeling as a strategy for everything. Like you said, activities of daily living, you're trying to model where you can for the child, as well as kind of speak them through it. So promoting modeling, I always think it's really important to think about typically developing speech. So like child will hear a sound. I know myself, I have a toddler, will hear a word and want you to say it back to them over and over and over and over and over, hundreds of times. I think it's the research is 500 times plus before the child really understands the word and then can use it. So really, to have functioning communication system, your receptive language and your receptive understanding of a word or a sentence or a context needs to be really strong before you can be expected to use that then functionally in everyday life. There's a big difference between being able to just say a word back after somebody and knowing how to use it and when to use it, and the true understanding of that. And the same goes for AAC. Just because a child could maybe say a word or do doesn't mean that they understand how to use it within the context of the device, be it the navigating. Again, that's a real OT help piece there. Does the child maybe need a key guard? Do they need an access? Do they need a pen? Do they need something else to help them besides their finger? And then modeling that for them using their device is just so powerful. Just like you would say the word for your child, you would also say the word using the device on the child's device, and they help to learn the motor pattern as well then. So this is what I do to get access that folder and then that word that I use. So again, modeling,
like even
so
what you're
powerful
on there, Amy, about like watching and modeling is even like I have noticed it with some of the parents filling out Gabadoos. Obviously they upload videos as well, and we give guidance around like if they have an AAC device, them modeling for their child and how they're doing it or how they're trying to engage their child with it. So that can often be a thing that comes up, is that they've got the device, but they haven't really been shown how to model it for their child. So their confidence is a bit like, am I doing this right?
And it's slow sometimes. You don't get the same. Again, I always try to think of a toddler. You don't get them saying the words straight away back to you the first time you do it. It has to be done lots of different times. So it's also about giving parents an okay, that it's okay if they don't say it back or they don't use the device in a particular way. It's okay if they kind of stim repetitively using the words. That's okay. It doesn't mean that it's not working for them. It's the way that they are choosing to explore their communication system. So it's kind of, I suppose, like you said, releasing some of that pressure of just because we've given you this device, it's not going to be doing any singing and dancing for you. And that's what I kind of mean about the commitment from families and from schools, that it is work. It is, you have to model. It's it's really the evidence-based way of promoting it. Again, I know myself, I've probably been guilty of doing it in the past, saying, say it using your talker, say it using device. We now know that that's actually just compliance. It's not actually giving the child empowerment. So again, I'm now modeling that on the device. Oh, you want to have the red pen? Okay, well, I think I'll have the blue pen. And I'm pressing the buttons along with the child. I was pressing it off screen there, you can see it. Pressing the buttons along with the child. So I'm showing them in context what that looks like. So I think that's a really powerful strategy.
Really powerful and really important. And what about for some parents as well, that have maybe downloaded one of the, communication
Absolutely.
programs. They have it on their iPad at home and they're getting some success maybe with using it. They may also come onto the platform looking for a bit of support. Like, what would be your view on that? You just meet the parents where they're at with their child and just kind of build on strategies from there?
Yeah, and that's a new shift actually away from the kind of specified prescribed devices, as we're getting more and more families who are probably know more than I do when it comes to talking about some of these apps and some of these devices. I know on Instagram there's loads of really helpful pages they're really easy to access and have really good evidence-based information. So we're getting lots of parents going, actually, I'm going to take initiative here and I'm going to look at this, or I'm going to download a free trial, or I'm going to contact the company myself and ask for it. So I think it's really important that you're meeting the family where they're at. This is a family who's showing dedication, commitment, and real desire to try and help their child. And I mean, what therapist doesn't want to work with a family who are ready and primed? Sometimes families download with the best intention an app, and then that's where you use your clinical skills as a therapist to say, do you know what? I really like the way that app does that, and I can see why that helps him. Have you looked at this one? And the reasons for that are, I think it gives him more options, or it's more robust, or from maybe an OT perspective, we can actually change the switch access to it, and I think that's the way to meet families. Absolutely say, fantastic that you've done this. What works for that? What makes that work for your family? It might be that it's a really light thing to carry around, something simple as that. And then taking that information, and if it needs to be kind of maybe modified or altered, using that in your clinical experience then to try and support the family around that.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like, okay, you've done this now.
Yeah.
The therapist can come in and kind of look, here are little adaptations that you could make,
Absolutely.
or that was a great starting point. Now I've got an idea of where we could kind of go with this. So it really is just kind of empowering that parent as well. And like you said, validating the fact that they put so much.
Amazing.
And like, would there be good research around kind of AAC and support over telehealth or in general?
Yeah, so it's a new, it's new for everybody. There's lots of really useful videos and resources, particularly coming from the USA and Australia, where they had a lot more direct intervention. I don't think they were redeployed to swabbing and things like that, like a lot of us were at the time. So I think they actually had longer periods of kind of direct intervention through lockdown. So I don't have as much experience, because it was during lockdown, and actually I was on maternity leave. So I've come back now and I'm back face to face. So I kind of really I wouldn't be able to actually give as much information as some of these people. So there's some links that I can share with you, Jess, for the blog, particularly coming from Assistiveware, and also Anne Page, who I find really helpful. She works specifically on AAC. I think she's AAC for All on Instagram, and I find her information really practical and helpful. But again, on telehealth, you're using your core boards, you're using your Love, and then if you have the same device as a child or the same app as a child, literally modeling like we are here now. I'm like, oh, I really liked the way you pressed the green button. So actually physically modeling again, using your law of signs, using your core boards, having those really easy, accessible, low technology supports ready, and feeling confident in using them as well.
And I suppose, unfortunately, we do have to consider the fact of like barriers for some families. Are there things that, obviously wait lists and, parents waiting for so long is a huge barrier. Are there other challenges you see? Obviously, family commitment was another really good that some families are not ready for and taking on a new.
And I mean, I've worked with families who felt like they were, and then when actually we really talked it through, and that's where I think it's really important. I've reflected on that, of saying this is what it would look like, and this is how slow it might be, for want of a better word, for you to see them actually using the device in the way that you think they should be using it. The other thing about it's such a fast moving world. Like I refer to being on maternity leave there. My colleague and I were both on maternity leave, came back, and sure, there's 20 new things. So even to try and keep up as a therapist yourself who's really interested in the area and gets to use it on a daily basis, I'm still like, what is that thing? I've never heard of it. Give me some time. And not a lot of us have a lot of time then dedicated to kind of exploring it. So that can be challenging. And that's where I suppose things like the Instagram pages are great, because they tend to be updated rather than maybe documents online. I definitely respond better to watching videos or maybe listening to a podcast. So I would recommend trying to kind of find somebody who aligns with what you would like clinically to kind of promote, and try to kind of immerse yourself in as much new knowledge as possible. Again, the States seem to be where a lot of these apps and kind of ideas originate. So I would tend to look to people in the States and maybe Australia for some advice. I mean, the lack of funding support, I could talk all day about it in the public service. Realistically, I think we should all, as therapists, particularly in the public system, have our own iPads that are loaded with all these apps, because it's really hard. It's like your law of science. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
Do you know, so if you're not modeling on your device on a regular basis, and in your handed someone's device, you're like, oh, that's totally different to mine. What do I do? And it can lead to a feeling of maybe a little bit of lack of confidence then in yourself in maybe giving these strategies. So there are a lot of the companies out there, so the likes of Safe Care Technologies in Cork, who are brilliant, Liberator, Smartbox, where if you contact them as a therapist, I don't think it matters, I'm saying this now, they'll probably kill me, but I know that they would give you free versions maybe of an app for yourself, or give you a trial that you could maybe download your own phone. So if you're really interested in looking at, there are fantastic supports there. Some of the apps have non-talking versions, so they don't actually speak, they're free, but you can actually get an idea of the layout and how to kind of manipulate them as well. So that's something I would recommend if you're interested in trying to get that for yourself. And then again, I mean, like everything, trying to change and shift people's attitudes and expectations, that's part of all of our daily work. And particularly on the Gabadoo platform, I know you're going to be talking to parents about maybe a fixed idea, and you're trying to get them to come around to a new way of thinking. So that's a barrier for some. I think it comes with having a really practical approach, like you said, meeting the family where they're at, kind of not getting a fixed mindset ourselves on the clinical recommendations and what we think should happen, really listening to the routine of the day for the family, what else they have going on, and then trying to kind of give the best advice with all that knowledge. So yeah, I suppose they're the barriers. They're probably the barriers for a lot of things, but yeah, certainly trying to keep it up to date can be a challenge.
And I think from what you're saying there, definitely it seems, I mean, for therapists who, you know, will be supporting families in this area, the first step really is just to keep up to date. So like follow those Instagram pages, listen to the podcast, do a little bit of research, get your own iPad and download those things so you're familiar, because what a lot of families are coming on for is they have a lot of knowledge and they are looking for a little bit of more education, a bit of guidance about where to go. And it is that role then you can come on if you have that information to be able to share that. And that can be a huge part of what the platform is for certain areas of, because it's that education piece, that coaching piece. So, you know, some therapists will have been, some families will have been linked in with therapists, you know, and they'll have been given guidance around how to model it and use it. Maybe you will be that kind of supportive piece. And I think it can be kind of an all or nothing. I find that even with OT, with something like feeding or toileting, it can be, well, I don't really do AAC, or I don't know about that. Whereas it's to remember that it's not about that. It's about educating yourself about this part of our practice so that you feel informed, like you said, and confident that if a parent brings it up, that you can share that little bit of expertise that you have, but also learn from them.
Absolutely.
Some families and parents, they're unbelievable.
And the kids themselves, like they're coming with apps. Some of the teenagers I work with, I've never even heard of them. Some Chinese app, one of them came to me the other day and I was like, I've never heard of that. Can I see what that looks like? So even just saying, I've never heard of that, instead of this kind of, I know when I started off as a therapist, you're nearly afraid to say, I don't know about that thing. But actually, this is one of the areas that moves so quickly. It's really hard to know everything about it. But that's again why I go back to our kind of resources that are really dependable, like Love, particularly in Ireland. I know I'm probably speaking for an Irish audience, but things like Makaton, in our BSL as well in Britain, and your core boards, because they're the same. You know, they're the reliables, they work, they're evidence-based. So although the world of the high technology, the apps and things might be kind of ever changing, the core kind of methods and message behind a total communication approach remains the same. So it's respecting authenticity, it's listening to your client, but also promoting really a massive communication toolkit. And that doesn't always have to be the high-flying fancy new app. So just knowing that as well. Yeah.
I use Love all the time. I use
Oh.
like I worked very closely with speech and language therapists for years and picked
Yeah.
up, and I just absolutely love them. And like
Yeah.
so under our organization section on Gabadoo, Love and Safe Care Technologies, they're both organizations
Brilliant.
that are listed there. And you were talking about the core boards. We'll
Yeah.
definitely look at maybe having a video on Gabadoo so
Great.
connect in, even to empower parents that they could make a core board at home as their
Absolutely.
intervention, or they might use
Yeah.
this as something to support their child. So you've given tons of ideas there.
Oh, and like Safe Care, I've worked with Safe Care myself in the past, and I've done some resource development on their website, and they've got lots of really helpful ones there. I know Connor and Michael have been working really hard on kind of updating their resources. So yeah, I would check that out. Again, Love Online, Deirdre Coleman, SLT runs, helps out with that Love page, and she's always giving some really practical advice, practical signs that are kind of in tune with, I think she was doing sunshine the other day, which obviously is not relevant today where I am anyway, but you know, really helpful ones like that. And that kind of keeps it in your mind as well, to know, oh yeah, I forgot about that, or oh, I remember that now because I saw it this morning when I was having my breakfast or something.
And I think for therapists to remember that, like, if you don't have the information, signposting a family just where to go is unbelievable. Like, I think we take for granted sometimes, oh, they'll know where to find that information, or they will be rolling hours through, you know, different information, but they mightn't. So you can give snippets of what you know, and then signpost them to those organizations.
Absolutely.
They can take more from, they can learn things from. So,
and they can do it at their own pace as well. You know, sometimes writing big reams of recommendations and things like that, you know, you really want to be kind of empowering parents to say, here's where you can find out more information, and then they can kind of decide what's relevant for their family or not. So again, moving away from that prescriptive model to more of a kind of family-centered partnership approach to learning, and maybe saying, why don't you have a look at that and maybe come back to me then, and we can see what you took from that, and let's see if we can then try to focus on that a little bit more.
I think that's important. We understand that everyone has busy lives, and you know, it's nice if someone gives you that bit of information. So when you have time to really kind of like, you know, research it a bit, and certain things link with certain families and other things don't. So
absolutely.
You know, empowering them. But thank you so much, Amy. There's just so much information there. It was brilliant, and I'm sure if any therapists get in contact if they have questions,
absolutely,
you
no
are
problem.
Good. You said you'd answer some of them.
Absolutely, no problem.
We'll be updating a blog post for AAC, and that blog post then will be available to families when they're actually filling out a Gabadoo for that area. But in the email that we send therapists about this video, I'll attach in some of those links that you mentioned, so people, you know, can do a bit more research themselves.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciate the coming on and having the opportunity to talk about it. I love talking about it, so it's great to have other people who are virtually here as well and interested. So thank you so much for giving me some space to talk as well. I really appreciate it.